Hello and welcome to the season 2 of the Gallimaufric Science Podcast, a podcast about science, art, and culture. We are your co-hosts, Scott Elliard and Raven Amos.
A pair of designers, artists, and nerds living in Alaska.
This month's episode is about Sentenced to Prism by Alan Dean Foster, but first we'd like to open up with a topic called State of the Art, where we briefly touch on our art projects that we're working on under the Cubelight Graphics umbrella, and where we also talk briefly about projects from other artists we follow.
For this month's State of the Art, we're going to open with Scott and talk a little bit about his project that he's working on.
Right. Yeah, I just finished a painting called God of War, which is a Tyrannosaurus themed painting for the Electro Tiki series that I have.
Explain a little bit more about your Electro Tiki series.
Mostly it's skeletals of dinosaurs and other extinct animals with lights on them, usually incorporated into some sort of background.
You also give him kind of a neat little fractal heart on the inside, too.
That's true. I try to do something neat on the inside to draw the attention just a little bit.
So what other paintings have you done in this series?
Oh, I have done Triceratops, which is a Triceratops.
That was one of your first, right?
That was one of my first, yes. The Tiki Cosmonaut was one of the first. That was a mannequin-shaped figure.
Kind of based on your micronauts that you like to collect, right?
Yeah, somewhat.
A lot of transparent, translucent parts and glowing bits on the inside.
Yes, indeed. So most of the rest of them have been extinct animals, though.
Very good. Also, a very good series of paintings. I'm very glad to see you do another one.
Thank you. I'll be working on another one very shortly here, I hope.
On my end of things, I've been kind of struggling with a painting for the past several years of a pair of Therizainosauruses known from Alaska from a set of footprints in Denali National Park. Finally got some forward progress done on that, and I hope to be finishing it here, well, within the next couple months anyway. It's part of a much larger project I'm working on, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I get a little bit further, and maybe we'll discuss things a bit more in a future episode.
Well, that sounds cool.
Now let's dive into our topic. First, let's talk about our topic. We are discussing Sentenced to Prism, a book by Alan Dean Foster.
Yes, it's a great book loaded with great ideas and examples of world building.
So Alan Dean Foster, if our audience is not familiar with his works, he also did a Star Wars novel called Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
And he wrote the Star Wars novelization for the film.
Correct, yes. Which films?
He's done a number of films, actually. So Aliens,
All novelizations?
all novelizations, Clash of the Titans, many more on top of that.
So this book is actually a standalone novel in what's called his Humanics series.
Yes.
I have to admit, I'm not actually familiar with the rest of the series of the books. I just kind of latched on to this one, but there's other things kind of going on in the grander world. But I like it because even though they mention parts of like the other novels, you know, people that have read the other novels are be like, "Ooh, that's an Easter egg." I don't know anything about it, but it's still a very enjoyable novel. Even if you're not up on knowing the rest of the Humanics series that Alan Dean Foster made.
Yeah, it stands alone, as it says.
You want to go ahead and start talking about it?
Yeah, it begins in media res with Evan Orgel, who is cased in a suit suitable for traversing this planet called Prism, which is a very harsh and inhospitable planet. Although it does have a breathable atmosphere, it is still filled with flora and fauna, which are inimical to human life.
Everything, with very few exceptions, is based on silicon. So silicon and silicates and all that entails, all the hardness and sharp bits.
Yep, there are animals that can laze, or plants that can laze. It depends on how you talk about such things.
The interesting thing is, even with as alien as these creatures are in both form and function, they have a civilization, a society, an associative, as they call it.
Right, with highly specialized members. Some serving as walls, some serving as conduits, some serving as scouts and warriors, libraries and physicians, all working together to form this unit.
So symbiosis writ large, huh?
Yeah.
In the way that they kind of describe the associative, which is this collection of very different looking alien creatures that work together to form buildings or conduits or thinking members of society. So symbiosis writ large, yes. Yes, they all work together, even though they are disparate entities. They kind of form a collective. In the way that Alan Dean Foster kind of describes their society, it's almost like the workings of a cell, only as a civilization, basically, a culture, where each part is connected to a whole, even though they don't look interrelated. They all work together, which is kind of a contrast to what we call sense and suitability in terms of this book, where the aliens are basically survival of the friendliest.
Yeah.
They survive because they work together and are cooperative. They understand that their actions or lack of action can affect the associative as a whole. So it's interesting because the individual parts still retain their individuality even though they work towards a common goal. And you see that with some of the character development in the book.
Right, right.
So we'll talk about sense and suitability here.
Well, first, there's a very strong contrast. Samstead is the home planet of Evan Orgel, and he's a professional troubleshooter. So he goes to places and fixes problems for people. But everyone on Samstead wears some sort of specialized suit or other because of the weather.
Right. In the book, they describe a lot of storms hitting this main city of Samstead, which is
Yes.
where Evan and his corporation is based out of, that he works with, that he troubleshoots for.
Which is sort of illegally colonizing Prism, or at least exploiting Prism.
He spends a lot of time in the book describing how utterly cushioned people are from the outside world and how that kind of affects their worldview. And that's brought up many times in the book.
Yep, they use suits for everything, for swimming, for getting around in general, and there's a degree of specialization that goes with the suits as well, especially the suit that Evan Orgel winds up with to traverse to Prism, which he is being sent to investigate a station that has ceased all human contact with the corporation. So he's being sent there to find out why communication has failed.
He's also shown something by the president of the company to make the journey a little more enticing for Evan, because Evan himself is a bit of a thinker, a bit of a curious sort. So he is shown one of the minor inhabitants of Prism that they managed to smuggle off-world.
Right, a little piece of living jewelry.
Yes, yes. Kind of interesting the way that they describe it, too. Like citrine, but alive.
Yeah, so there's a great contrast between suited and unsuited because, of course, Evan Orgel's suit fails him very shortly after he arrives on Prism. While the suit's designers tried to anticipate everything that the planet could throw at it, they couldn't anticipate everything that the planet could throw at it.
Like laser bushes.
Yes.
Yes, bushes that fire freaking laser beams at you.
Freaking laser beams, yes.
So we propose a new literary term, much in the vein of Chekhov's gun. I would like to put forward Foster's suit, which is an item that is nice and shiny and complex, introduced in the first half of the book, will invariably break down or be rendered useless by Act 2.
Right. So the first thing that happens to Evan Orgel after he's out of the suit is he has to acquire some sort of clothing and protection against the elements of Prism, which includes the bright sunlight and the reflectivity of the inhabitants.
Yes, because the plants, I guess you could call them, if you can call them plants, the sessile organisms of Prism have very reflective, shiny surfaces that kind of dazzle the senses. So
yeah.
The first order of business is protecting his eyes, which he fashions stuff from his now decrepit suit to... He managed to make a pair of visors out of the plastic that encased the foodstuffs that his suit had, because his suit has things like fruit juice concentrates and things that can be used to synthesize food. So the one he was able to get to, he managed to fashion into a pair of shades, essentially, that he would tie around his head, almost like a blindfold. It's kind of interesting the way that it's almost like Evan is being reborn on this planet after he emerges from the suit.
Right. Naked and afraid.
But in space. So when preparations fail, you can only be as prepared as you are clever, I guess. So Evan does show a lot of cleverness and adaptability to this planet, this utterly alien world. He's able to find some form of sustenance to get him through the first night.
He's able to find local food because there are also organosilicates.
Yes, things that have both silicon exoskeletons and soft fleshy bits on the inside.
Yes.
So we kind of go into protected versus unprotected, and what happens when preparations fail. Well, you have to get clever and perhaps a little bit friendly with the local inhabitants. So that's what happens later on. He meets this, well, at first he's not sure what it is. Describes it as a giant loaf of French bread, but blue, with many legs.
Kind of like a caterpillar.
Right, but even that's not a good description.
No. So this turns out to be Azure. That's not his full name, but that's what Evan Orgel shortens it to in order to make it manageable for him.
Of course, in order for Azure to give Evan his name, he has to go through a rather unpleasant experience of being connected to this animal, or alleged animal, by the use of communication tendrils directly into the brain. It's almost like Avatar, but not quite as pleasant. In fact, Azure, when he finally makes connections, makes a lot of fuss about how disused this organ is that they use to communicate with, which apparently all sentient, sapient creatures possess in this universe that Alan Dean Foster has constructed.
Right.
I kind of like that idea, that everybody has the ability to use this telepathic link, but they just forgot how or never bothered to relearn. Kind of a whole world is connected type thing.
Now we can note how suitless all the aliens are, but they cooperatively thrive. The Associative is a huge cooperative which is comprised of specialized members like walls or conduits or gatherers or scouts or warriors that help protect the associative. And they, of course, do not use suits at all.
Or tools of any kind.
Or tools of any kind, although you could suggest that the hyperspecialization of the physicians comes with tools.
Natural ones.
Natural tools, yes.
So Evan is, of course, shaken throughout the entire book about how these native inhabitants are able to achieve levels of technology, for lack of a better term, almost on par with humans.
Yes, without the benefit of a supply chain or an industrial basis for much of what they can produce.
Right, they kind of leave the processing to members of their associative. So they have processors. Members of the associative can take raw ingredients and refine them into minerals that can then be used by other members.
Right.
Often in surprising ways.
So let's talk about the associative a little bit.
Okay.
Well, a little bit more than we've been talking about it. And this is apart from getting into the plot, which we're not really going to get into because we don't feel that.
We're not about that in this episode. We are more about kind of expounding on the world building and some of the themes touched upon in this book. And after giving it kind of a read through again, how prescient some of it actually is.
Yeah.
First, let's dive into more of the associative, kind of a consensus-based anarchy, if you want to call it that. But one of the characters in the book, Azure, makes a very interesting observation about how anarchy cannot exist with reason.
And the associative is all about reason.
So in their culture, everybody comes to a consensus, and of course the individual, depending on what part of the associative it is, like walls are described as being curious but kind of stupid.
Yeah.
They are curious about knowing things, but they may not be able to do very much with the information.
And the closest thing they have to a generalist is the scouts. Well, Azure is one.
We should probably read his full name, which is kind of long, but they give it's very descriptive. A surface of fine azure-tinted reflection with pyrox and dendritic inclusions is Azure's full name. That's something that I kind of like about this associative, is they kind of need things described. They comment with some disdain about how undescriptive Evan's name is, Evan Orgel. So he sounds very disappointed when Evan then shortens it to Azure, as we are oft wont to do as humans.
Right. So Azure is, as mentioned before, a scout who goes outside the confines of the associative and searches for resources and dangers during the day.
So imagine his surprise when he comes across Evan in a cave. We say he, and Evan refers to him as he in the book, but of course, Azure, like many of the other inhabitants of the associative, are asexual.
Right.
Reproduce by budding. So a lot of the book, of course, centers around Evan and his own struggle with the alienness of this planet and its inhabitants.
Evan struggles to understand what the aliens are about.
Maybe their motives a bit too.
Of course, their motives are also a mystery to him as well.
And likewise, his motives to them.
Of course. There's a lot that they can learn from each other, though.
Exactly. Each learns from the other. And that is something that comes up a lot as a theme in the book, is learning from one another and the exchange of information and the surprising things that people can do with information once it's given to them, if they're clever enough.
For example, the incident with the battery. The associative is entirely dependent on sunlight for its energy. So during the nocturnal hours, there is no activity going on. There's very little the associative can do about events which happen during the night, for example.
Because they, like most of the creatures on Prism, are what are referred to as photovores. They get most of their energy from the sun.
Right. However, Evan introduces them to the concept of a battery. As an example, he's got the beacon in his wrist that he removes from his wrist and shows to physicians. And they examine it, take it apart, put it back together for him, and decide to start making batteries for everyone.
And of course, Evan, thinking like a soft, squishy thing, is saying you cannot just add organs willy-nilly to yourself. And the associative says, well, why not?
Yeah, the associative is like, can't tell us what to do.
And invariably, they prove Evan wrong. You don't need micro-manufacturing facilities to create a battery if you are an organosilicate life form. So the battery, I believe, is a good example of interspecies cooperation there, a theme in the book.
Right.
And another instance of them learning from each other, because, they learn about, oh my goodness, there are storage methods which can be augmented to our own rather easily, and Evan realizes that, these aliens are very intelligent and they can do things that are surprising and beyond his understanding.
Right.
Even though they seem to be on the outside very primitive. So, as we have said before, this is kind of naked and afraid in space, and as the book goes on, he becomes a little less naked in terms of both adornment and friendship with the inhabitants of this planet. While he doesn't understand their motives completely, if they even have any, which throughout the book, their motive tends to be just curiosity, plain and simple.
Right. The hallmark of an intelligent species.
They're very curious about him. They want to know more about things. And one of the things that interested them was the concept of being able to see the stars. Because of their photovore lifestyle, they have to shut down during the night to preserve their functions.
So astronomy is an unknown science to them.
So for some fleshy thing that they see as, well, perhaps being as a mere curiosity, maybe a pet, to come up with some very interesting and surprising to them solutions to problems.
Right. Well, I think Evan formally joins the associative when he defends their associative from the Varacorites that attack at night.
Yes, an organosilicate life form that does not rely on the sun and is a constant thorn in the associative side.
Yes, Evan drives away the first attack, but the next night they come back in force to help finish the job and to deal with Evan. But by this time, batteries have been implemented in the Warriors and several other members of the Associative, and a little surprise is waiting for the Vracorites.
Something they weren't expecting.
Something they weren't expecting.
And again, another instance of showing how cooperation on this planet is much better than raiding parties, really, because your raids are only as successful as the helplessness of your victim. And suddenly, with the introduction of a simple battery, Evan has all of a sudden changed the course of life on this planet. He has violated the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Prime Directive exists in Alan Dean Foster's world, considering how much colonization is seen as a theme in this book, too.
Right.
In fact, the whole book kind of takes colonization and turns it on its head in a way.
Yep. Because as time goes on, Evan acquires more and more features that are designed for him by the physicians of the associative so that he can survive without external assistance. They change his eyes, they change his guts after an attack with an animal.
A rather nasty creature, yes. Something that everybody was afraid of.
Yep, in order to save his life.
So the reason why Evan is even associating with these aliens is in the first place is to help facilitate the finding of a potential survivor of this research station that his corporation has built. Because when he gets to the research station, of course, everybody is dead, and the research station is kind of decaying around him because of the effects of the planet, leaching resources from the very metals that make up the research station and the
Right.
unfortunate corpses of the unfortunate victims. So when Evan sets down on the planet, he is, of course, trying to figure out what happened and notices that somebody is missing from the party.
Right. And either she has survived or her beacon is still actually functioning and she has not survived. But Evan Orgel sets out to find her.
Which is how he runs into the associative in the first place. Runs into Azure on his way.
Much is described in terms of crystalline nature of even living organisms in the book. And fractals play a substantial role in the novel's visual background.
Of course, fractals exist in organic nature, but they are of a different sort here.
Yeah, very different sort here. We should talk about the cover art.
Barclay Shaw is the cover artist for this novel. I am not as familiar with his work as Scott is, so I will let him.
It was published in 1985, and Barclay Shaw was on a lot of science fiction and fantasy novels from the 80s. Oh, and he got his start from Harlan Ellison, who invited Shaw to paint cover illustrations, according to Wikipedia.
So they don't actually go into any kind of details about which novels he did. They said, yeah, he did some novels for these guys.
Well, Wikipedia mentions that Isaac Asimov, C.J. Sherry, Larry Niven, A.E. Van Vogt, and Frederick Pohl are all authors that Barclay Shaw has done covers for. But of course, he's also done covers for Harlan Ellison.
Also, according to Wikipedia here, he's done work for DARPA, the U.S. Army, and the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. Kind of an interesting artistic figure there. I do appreciate an artist that branches out and does a lot of different subject matters. So according to this, he's also got an art compilation book made by the sadly defunct Paper Tiger Books, compilation called Electric Dreams, The Art of Barclay Shaw, with an introduction by Harlan Ellison. So that sounds like a book that we need to get.
Yes, it does.
Paper Tiger Books published a lot of really great art compilation books.
So let's talk about Alan Dean Foster some more. He's widely traveled. He's got a website up on the internet, and he has written a ton of novels.
Yeah, we discussed Splinter of the Mind's Eye at the beginning of the episode,
Yeah.
which is a Star Wars novelization.
I think Sentence to Prism is one of my favorite novels of his, but he has also worked on novels like the Ice Rigger series.
Yes, also very good, kind of its own thing, not connected with the Humanics world, as far as I know.
Right.
But yes, that was a very good series. Also with some great cover art, but the novels also inspired an artist that we are very fond of, Wayne Douglas Barlow. Wayne Douglas Barlow, in his book Barlow's Guide to Extraterrestrials, did a great depiction of a Tran, one of the creatures from Ice Rigger, the Ice Rigger novel. And of course, we are lamenting that he never ventured into Sentence to Prism here, because I think we all would have loved to have seen Barlow's vision of what the inhabitants of Prism looked like.
Yeah, that would have been really, really compelling, I think. I read this book when it first came out in 1985, I think when I was living in Japan, and it left quite an impression on me, and I still have my copy. But yeah, it is one of my favorite Alan Dean Foster books. You should definitely check it out if you haven't already.
It's a great introduction to his work if you're not already familiar with it, too.
Indeed. Well, that's it for episode 1 of the Gallimaufric Science Podcast, Season 2. Where can you find us now on social media now that Twitter is sort of fragmenting and falling apart?
Well, we're still ride or die on Twitter. At least I am. So you can reach us there, either through my personal Twitter, Alaska Anime, or through the Cube Light account. We are also on Blue Sky. We've gone to bluer skies on Blue Sky. Also the same, alaskaanime.bsky.social.
And I'm at cgfx.bsky.social.
You can find us on Beware the Radio, with new episodes the last Friday of the month and a repeat airing the first Friday of the month, the following Friday, 2 p.m. Alaska time, 11 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. You can also find us on our YouTube channel, Gallimaufric Science. And of course, you can reach us on our website at cubelight.graphics. Or if you're not using Firefox right now, cgfx.us. And don't worry if you get a security certificate warning, we're working on that. You can find us on our individual Patreon accounts. Both Scott and I have Patreons. And on my Ko-Fi account. All right, well, without further ado, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Gallimaufric Science Podcast. This is Raven, signing off.
This is Scott signing off. Thank you for listening.